time, and I'm now learning to turn off my phones at certain times. And there's one day when I just won't entertain anybody at all. This is my committed writing day. So I'm, working at being honorable to what I know I need to do
Hmm.
in order to do this other work.
Yes. And the cultural work, which is essential, is also exhausting.
Hmm.
And, I'm sure as you say, turn off your phone at a particular time, that you need to also rest and take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Well, there's within your work, the poetry, prose, your speeches, your presentations, there is that preoccupation with culture, and there's that expression, and you do it in a very creative way, of the value, the legacy of our culture, and how that has nurtured us and what we have learned from it. Um, so there's been that focus on the ancestors, but I noticed in your most recent poem about your grandchild, you are journeying, looking forward to the future now on the descendants, those
Hmm.
that are coming after us. So right now we are becoming their ancestors. Um,
Hmm.
in the poem, my granddaughter's poem, you called us into a consciousness about transmitting our history or culture or moral principles as well into the next generation. How important is it for us to do this? And based on your knowledge and your work within the community, and you have worked all over the globe, not just in Jamaica, are we as people of color, African descendants, are we doing that? Are we engaging in this way?
Not enough, only a small percentage of us. For me, it's really sad that the vast majority of people in Jamaica don't seem to have their connection with their ancestors. I mean, their grandmother, their grandfather, but they don't seem to understand that it takes 4 generations for them to be here. And we don't seem to, I want to use the word revere our ancestors who have paved the way for us. And I know that many of us have had really negative experience with mothers or grandmothers or whatever. But I really think that's part of what is missing for us as a people to step forward in the bold way that we once did. And it's taken us a long time. And I think it's that disconnection with ancestors. I also think because we're now in a time period where there's no intergenerational dialogue. When I was a child, you went there, the social setting primarily was, you go to a party or an occasion, and there was your mother, and there was your grandmother, and then there was a little baby, and everybody was running around and talking, and people were dancing. It wasn't just one generation. And so I think we've
Yeah.
really lost that connection, which is important. And I want to make sure that my new granddaughter has that connection. And I was so moved when my son says, Mommy, because he's in California, I want you to come up and spend some time with us, and I want you to sing Jamaican songs to her, and I want you to tell her Anansi stories. Because if you don't do that, she's not really going to have that. And I want her to have that because that was so important to me. And I remember all the summers, you took us to Jamaica to spend time with grandma. So
Hmm.
that really moved me. And so this grandchild has put a whole nother fire under me to ensure that the legacy continues. So I'm going to read the poem, okay?
Hmm. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's called My Granddaughter's Poem, and her name is Cazeli, which is Mexican indigenous for feather, because her mother
Oh,
is Mexican, and Abeni is West African, means we called, we asked for her. And that's my son's tradition that he's very proud of. The foot of a poem helps you to move from line to content, which is helpful if the poem decides to run a red light, realizing it has missed a stanza and the rhythm does not adhere to an A, B, C, D, nor A, C, B, D rhyming scheme, and it has completely forgotten or ignored all of its 28 different feet. But a granddaughter, who is a poem, that connects you to mother, to grandmother, to a legacy whose future is not yet written, is a free verse, whose sweetness cannot be measured, only savored, like a sun-ripened mango left for its own fulfillment, and thus is a blank verse. Each day a new poem is born, a star mingles among us, and the intrinsic connection of a granddaughter to her grandmother is epic. While scholars delineate the 168 different forms of poetry, my granddaughter makes me remember what's important. Like the soft layer of a sweet potato pudding with just the right mixture of coconut milk blended with a dash of cornmeal or yellow yam, which is why a recipe is a misnomer for each one to her own taste. But this is just the beginning of a continuity. People make history, and poetry records our deeds. First, this child plants her feet in my narrative, then runs giddily ahead, sending verses flying with the sand.
Wow, so beautiful. I love the
Thank
way
you.
you mix all that graphic imagery, the sensual imagery, just so powerful. Granddaughter running in the sand, or toes in this, it's just beautiful.
Thank
So,
you.
um, so how does it feel? I mean, this poem says a lot. It really uh, exposes your strong connection to history, also the the value you're putting into what it means to be a grandmother by putting forth your grandchild into the future, um, with expectations.
Indeed.
With expectations. Let me ask you, you have a very distinct voice, and your two daughters have that voice as well. Does your grandchild, or is it too early to tell? Did she inherit that?
It's too early to tell, but just the vibes that I get from her, I think she will have a very distinct voice and will, because both my two daughters, as well as I, we're really committed to make sure that she knows us and knows the culture and celebrates the culture. So it will be interesting. She's too young. She's just not
She's too
even
young
three
to
minutes.
tell. I wondered
Right.
about that. I'm like, does she have the voice as well? Quite like she's going to, because all three of you do.
Yeah.
So, okay, most of your poems, well, a lot of your poems are historical poems. Um,
hmm
Many are autobiographical, are they?
Well, some are. One of the things I used to say to my students in my graduate writing class is that the moment you start to write something, even if it's based on your life, you're beginning to fabricate because
Mm-hmm.
it's your memory and it's also how you want to present your story. Each
Yeah.
of us has a very specific way in which we want to present ourselves in the world. So I draw a lot on my biography, but my biography is also infused with history and culture and, the imagination, because that's what happens as a writer. You pull all of these various pieces of the thread together and you plait or you weave them into something that you've created that somehow represents you, but is also very different from you in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, take for instance this poem from the new collection, The Storyteller's Return, which is ancestors, since we're speaking about ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And the print is such that I might have to put on my glasses. So, I wrote this poem before I had a granddaughter, because the granddaughter is new, born this year. And it was me thinking about my ancestors, but it was also me thinking about us as Jamaicans specifically, and what ancestors mean or don't mean to us, or what I think they ought
Mm-hmm.
to mean to us. And it somewhat addresses your question about, do you think we are being mindful and consistent enough in creating this link about ancestor. And I think the poem answers that.
Mhm.
When we learn the name of the nameless, we will not be nameless. The storyteller is soaking in a metal tub under the tamarind tree. Lavender, basil, and lemongrass perfume the water. She uses the loafer sponge to scrub and song her body. When we own what we know, our knowledge cannot become unknown. The birds are watching the storyteller bathing outside in the evening air. They gather on the tree branch, chirping their assent, but warning. Mind you catch cold, you're not so young anymore, you know. Before all that we have gets erased, register your deeds. Sweeten your yams with coconut milk and feed it to your children. That's what I'm doing with my grandchild. Disavow modesty. Be purposeful, consistent, unwavering. The storyteller uses the calabash to pour water on her head. She closes her eyes, uses one hand to wipe the leaves that linger on her face. Mother Owl, watching, clicks her tongue. She sure forget cool now. Thinking she sees someone, the storyteller calls out, "Is Duppy our living being?" No response. She giggles, but is not done. "Me catch you." The storyteller nibbles on jerk coconut flakes, sips lemongrass and mint tea, allows the rhythm of the drums to transport her, surging through her body. Every story has a night, and every gone home happens in a yard. The storyteller stands up in the tub and Kumina's home. So in